Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Adult Education and Literacy Bidders Conference. My name is Brittany Boston, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and I will be your facilitator for today's meeting. Today, you'll be hearing from Kathy Olson-Tracy from the Illinois Community College Board, but before I hand it over to her, I just want to remind you of a few things. As a participant on today's meeting, you are in listen-only mode, but we do want to hear your questions and comments. We are asking that you type them into your questions or chat feature. That way we have record of them for the FAQ that ICCB will be completing for you to review at a later date. We are also recording today's session, and the recording from today and last week's Bidders Conference will be shared on ICCB's website as well for you to access at a later time. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Kathy Olson-Tracy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Bidders Conference. I'm hoping that you're all having a great day. Today's conference meeting is really focusing about going over the Adult Education and Literacy RFP. We're going to talk about the submittal process, and then we're going to be able to address your questions. And again, it's very important that you type them in, because even if I'm not able to answer them right now, we will have answers, and we will post by the beginning of next week, the FAQs with answers for everything. Now today, everything that we're talking about, all the resources and the NOFO are found on the Adult Education ICCB website. There's a link in the handout for you, and you can go there and see, again, all of the tools and resources that we're going to go through today. Okay? Next slide. So again, we're going to have an ICCB staff member taking notes during this conversation, and we're keeping track of everything you're asking in the chat feature. This will allow us to take great records so that we can make sure we address all of your concerns. Okay, so next slide. Okay, we're going to start talking about funding, and this is where we're going to begin. So, are we happy about that? Okay, so the Adult Education and Literacy project comes together with multiple funding streams. So the funding streams include adult education, federal basic, state basic, and performance funding. There is a funding stream for correctional institutions. We wrap that up with the adult and literacy funding. And then we have the integrated English and literacy and civics education. You may file or write for the IELCE independently of all of the other funding, or you may write it in combination with all of the other grants. That is entirely up to you. New programs are not eligible to write for performance funding. That would be in your future years of funding. It's based on a prior year or more of adult education and literacy funding. Next slide. So what are we anticipating? And I'm going to say anticipating is what we have for allocations. Until our allocations are out, we can't, give you a final amount, but we are anticipating our federal basic, inclusive of AEL and corrections, to be just about $16.5 million. We anticipate our state basic to be at just about $22,600,000. Our IELCE money, we're expecting about $2.7 million. And our performance money is just slightly over $11 million. At this time, we are estimating the allocation of $53 million for the AEL programs. Okay. And again, these are estimates, and we will know as soon as we get our final allocations. Next slide. Program description. What are we looking for? So the purpose of the Adult Education and Literacy Grant is to achieve the Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. We are here to fulfill the responsibilities of this particular title. We want to make our adults literate and obtain knowledge and skills for employment and self-sufficiency. We want parents obtaining education that helps them become full partners in the education of their children. We need sustainability and improvements in the economic opportunities for their family. We want adults obtaining a secondary school diploma, and we want them transitioning into post-secondary education. We want them to, we want to assist immigrants and other individuals who are not English language learners, improve their reading, writing, speaking, and comprehension in English and math. And we want them to understand the American system of government. Okay, next slide. So again, these highlights that I'm sharing with you are very important for you to understand as you're developing and writing your narrative. We build these expectations on the WIOA law, and we're looking at the State of Illinois Unified Plan. There are 6 essential strategies from the State of Illinois Unified Plan, and they are to coordinate demand-driven strategic planning. They are to support employer-driven regional sector initiatives. They are to provide economic advancement for all populations through career pathways, expand service integration, promote improved data-driven decision-making, and advance public-private data infrastructure. There is a link in the NOFO that will take you to the state plan, and I encourage you to look through the sections that are relevant for Title II. And I'm going to pause for just a minute. I'm getting messages that my voice is waving in and out and that it's difficult to hear. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Is anybody having difficulty hearing me? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody indicate they're having problems. Okay.
Yeah, you've been fine on this end, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. Okay, again, we're talking about the Unified State Plan, the law for Title II, and we're going to look at the ICCB Adult Education Strategic Plan. All of these pieces are linked together to provide a very comprehensive idea of what the adult education and literacy program should look like. There are 4 strategic plan goals in the ICCB strategic plan. Again, they're improving outcomes by scaling effective models and strategies across systems. We want to increase post-secondary transitions and credential attainment. We want to strengthen college and career readiness, and we want to develop lifelong career pathway systems and enabling technologies. To have more details on what all of these look like, there is a link again in the NOFO to the Illinois Adult Education Strategic Plan. As you're preparing your proposal, I would encourage you to look at all of these pieces. They are here to show you that the focus and the direction of where we're going and what an effective plan is going to look like. Next slide. Okay, so our program priority. Again, the program priority is aligned with the expectations of WIOA, the expectations of ACTE. They fit very clearly with the ICCB strategic plan, and the program priorities are focusing on career pathway systems. We want to know how you're going to develop and expand career pathway systems for adult learners. We want partnerships with core and required partner programs, local workforce development boards, employers, higher education institutions, social service agencies, You know, your community partners, people who are serving the same students populations that you're serving. We want to get them all together. We are requiring a career pathway program that provides opportunities to transition into post-secondary education. So if you look at that, we are looking at bridge programs, integrated education and training programs, and workforce preparation programs. And these must be aligned with your local industry needs. As you've seen, if you've had a chance to look at the narrative and some of the other documents so far, we are required in this competition to have your local workforce investment board review the grant to ensure it's aligned with the local workforce needs. So when we talk about our local areas, this is very much a part of what we're doing. We are serving our students so that they can become sustainable and employed in their community based on the job market, the skills that are necessary, and the transitions into post-secondary education. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about what our priorities are. We've given you the background and what the law is that's driving this. We've talked about what our priorities are. Let's talk about providers, students, and demonstrated effectiveness. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I would encourage you to look at the section in the NOFO on eligible providers. We want to make sure that you fit in any of these categories to be eligible for funding. Okay, next slide. Okay, we often you will see in the proposal that there are opportunities for consortiums and sub-grantees. We encourage partnerships. We encourage relationships within an APC. So if you're looking to talk to existing programs that have had consortiums in the past, we will help you connect with them. A consortium allows you to serve and combine services for your area. Your sub-grantee provides a specific set of services. What we will also tell you on here is that your consortium versus sub-grantee is entirely your decision, but please make sure if you're proposing either one of these that all of the correct documentation is included. Your consortium partners need signature pages and a description of what they're going to provide and what their responsibilities are for this grant. Same way with a sub-grantee, we will need to describe what they're doing. I'm going to pause because there are two relevant questions coming in for this. We have a question that says, does the local workforce board need to sign off on a document that they reviewed the application and we have this document to include with our application? No. We will, as the agency, be providing the narrative to the local workforce boards, and they will read that and provide that to us. So they will be providing that review to us. If you look at the scoring category, it's really not a scorable category. We are still looking for alignment, and it will be accepted, approved, or unapproved. Basically, if you're looking at your local workforce needs, you're going to be fine. And there was a question about some of the documents. We have a budget narrative, and I'm going to ask, what we will do is double check the formatting on that. It looks like there's some formatting issues, so we will double check the formatting issue on that this week and get that corrected if there are problems with it. Okay? All right, so the question on that one was, the provider was not able to check student headcount on the cost allocation sheet, and the proposed sub-grants will not check no. So we will look at the formatting of the budget narrative to ensure that we have all of that formatting correct. Okay. Next slide. So another requirement that is a put out requirement by OCTAE is demonstrated effectiveness. The eligible applicant must have demonstrated effectiveness in serving the target populations. There's a question in a narrative for you to provide prior year's data. We are providing that information, and it will be posted this week so that you can actually have access to your program level data for some of the questions that are on that grant if you are a prior ICCB funded program. If you are not a prior ICCB funded program, you will still be required to answer that question with the data that you have available to you to be able to address how you have served programs. This is, again, not a scorable thing. It is a approved, not approved. Okay. Next question, or next slide. As you look through this, our priority populations are pretty detailed. Again, we are looking at programs to be required to serve a minimum number of students. And those students must be 16 years of age or older, not enrolled or required to be enrolled in a secondary school, and who are basic skills deficient, do not have a secondary school credential, or has not achieved an equivalent level of education. And of course, ESL learners are also a part of this category. So these are our priority populations. Next slide. Okay, before I move on and we start talking about required services, are there any questions? Type in the chat in the question feature, please. Are there any questions about what we've talked about thus far? The question that I have are entities that apply as a consortium or subcontract considered continuing or new applicants? So that depends on how that grant is written. If the fiscal agent, because in a consortium, you will require one entity to be a fiscal agent. If that fiscal agent is a prior served program, that performance dollars will be effective. If you're creating an entirely new program, then no. But based on what I'm seeing from your question, you have a past history of services. One of these entities would be the fiscal agent. If it's an entity that has received prior services, prior funding, then performance funding would be optional. So the demonstrated effectiveness is getting some questions. So are agencies not eligible to apply for funding if they do not reach demonstrated effectiveness? Right now, the demonstrated effectiveness is a very broad and sweeping term, okay? What I would expect as you look at that narrative, that you will be able to write your grant in a way that does demonstrate effectiveness through numbers of students served, through measurable skill gains. And I recognize, as does everybody in this agency, the impact of the last 2 years due to COVID and what that looks like. So there is a flexibility in how that information will be interpreted, okay? The performance data is going to be posted on the same website that all of these resources are on. And once that goes out, I would encourage you to look at that often and go back often. And we will have it posted. I know we had most of it pulled together, but we're doing a final review before we get it posted. So my goal is by the end of this week, but I would encourage you to look back at that page often. The consortium question about performance funding, if a new consortium is funded, I will have to get back to you on that. The question is, adding onto a consortium, will those programs forego some or all of the state performance funding? For existing programs, I do not believe they will forego all of their state performance funding, but I have to sit back and get some concrete information, and that answer will be in the FAQ section. Just give me a little bit of time to research that one, okay? Okay, so we're going to go into the required services. So next slide, please. Okay, we're still seeing people losing sound. Again, a show of hands if anybody's having difficulty.
So Kathy, I can hear you loud and clear. I would suggest if anyone is having issues with their sound, you can go to the audio drop-down on your toolbar and try to call in. Sometimes the call-in feature works better than the computer audio. So that would be my suggestion if anyone is having issues with their audio.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask one of you to reach out to the person.
Kathy, I was also having issues. I re-logged on and I shut down everything else that was on my computer. I was trying to multitask and that was also causing some issues. So
Okay.
that might be another alternative.
So I'm going to ask if somebody could please reach out to the person who indicated they lost sound, who may not be hearing the directions we're providing, and maybe put some of that suggestion in the chat feature for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the required services. These two pages, these two slides, this one and the next slide, will be summarizations of the pages 6 and 7 of the NOFO. So these are high-level summaries. I encourage you to look at the NOFO for more details. We expect that there are proposed services for all the students at all levels through the preparation, through low literacy to preparation for post-secondary education. So if your index of need is showing you have a population in your area that needs literacy services, we expect that population to be addressed in the proposal. Our federal requirement are that we serve the individuals most in need of AEL services. Again, we must serve students with disabilities. We have performance measures. We will go into more detail shortly about performance measures. We have to have local services that are aligned with WIOA local plans and services with local one-stops. And again, use research-based instructional practices aligned with the standards. These are all federal requirements. Next slide. Okay, we do require, again, this is a federal requirement, that you have technology integrated in your instruction and that you have distance learning components. We look at that scaling effective strategies that we talked about at the beginning. How that's going to be operationalized is at least one active bridge program in year 1 and at least one active bridge program and IET in years 2 and 3. This is a 3-year grant. Year 1 is the competition. Year 2 and 3 are the continuation. So in years 2 and 3, we are giving you a year to build that capacity to have effective IETs and ICAPs. Again, we expect well-trained staff members, coordination with other services in your area, flexible schedules. That high-quality information management system is how you're using data practices in our data management system. And again, if there are ESL learners in your area, those ESL learners are to be served in your program. I'm going to pause here. There's a relevant question. Let me get to it. Okay. The question here, and I saw another one I want to answer too. The question here, historically, IET programs could be through partnerships. Our agency is now required to have their own IET programs by year 2. If you have an IET that your students are eligible to access through a coordinated and partnering agency, and that these students access that and you are providing all of the services that your students can access, that would be fine. We are looking for partnerships. We expect partnerships to come out of the program. So if you have a partnering entity who is going to do the IET with you, and again, that's a partnership, then yes, that is fine in year 2. And then the question about the subgrantee and the performance dollars, again, I will address that specifically as I investigate how that works. If programs who have been priorly funded are developing a consortium for this competition, I will have to do some more deep dives into that question. And I appreciate that it's here in writing so I can make sure I get to that. Okay. Moving on, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, programs in year 2 that do not meet expectations will be required to submit a continuous improvement plan. We will work with you on bringing your performance and expectations to the level they need to be for year 3. And continual funding in years 2 and 3 are based on meeting expectations outlined in the required services. And I want to pause here for just a minute because I want to let you know that you are not alone as you implement these grants. Right now, we're looking for a comprehensive plan, what you want to accomplish, how you want to accomplish that. But once we put that in action and we start to operationalize these plans and we begin moving forward through our funding years, you have the full support of the ICCB and the Professional Development Network that's going to, is going to help you meet these targets. Okay. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to talk about performance measures, and then I'm going to go to that question that was just typed in. The performance measures, I will tell you, are set through what we call a negotiation process with OCTAE. What happens is they review our data, and I'm explaining this a little bit more in detail than the last meeting because I had a lot of questions about that. OCTAE looks at our data that we submit annually. They look at a continuous improvement model. They set the targets for us, and that's basically how we negotiate this, okay? So we don't set these, we don't renegotiate them. These are set through this process using our data and a continuous improvement model. For FY22, we are looking at employment at second quarter after exit. We are looking at employment fourth quarter after exit. We have a benchmark for median earnings. We're also looking at credential attainment rate and measurable skill gains. These are set for FY22. We will renegotiate FY23 and FY24 targets in late FY22. When we look at how you're going to achieve these measurements, this is statewide data, we work collaboratively with you. To link back to that question originally about demonstrated effectiveness, we are looking at your ability for this grant, for this competition, to identify that you have achieved 70% of an anticipated benchmark. So, you know, there's some flexibility in that because we recognize the impact of the pandemic in the last 12 months, okay? So I'm gonna look at some questions. Regarding IET partnerships, the providers need to state the full extent of the partnerships in the proposal, or are providers able to develop these partnerships during year 1? What I would expect in your proposal right now is that you're outlining the fact that you have the capacity to build these relationships and that this year will be a planning year so that you can fully implement in year 2 if you don't already have an existing IET. So you will have this year to plan. It will be required for continuation years. So allow your time to plan this, but indicate in there how you're going to do this. How are you going to achieve the IETs? The performance metrics are tracked through the data collection system. The question is, how will performance metrics be tracked? They will be tracked through the data collection system. The more comprehensive data that you use and integrate and ensure that your quality data is entered, the better chance we have of getting you those matches. Okay, so that becomes very critical in making sure that your data is complete as you enter it into your into DAISY. You will see questions in that narrative as we get to later that talk about your plans for managing your data. The more complete your data is, the better data tracking we have. We will have access to employment, and I'm not sure about earnings data. I believe we do, and that will be, and the reason I'm saying I'm not sure about earning data is that's not a required component in the RFP. However, yes, we are going to put that out. We are just doing a final review of the data before we post it. Okay, so for the new question is, what is an IET? An IET is an integrated education and training program. There are components that are required for an IET. Those a component to have adult basic education, a kind of a transition class for workplace literacy and contextualized instruction, and instruction for credentialized credential attainment. Within the NOFO, there are links to our resources that help provide a wealth of detail about what an IET looks like and how it can be built. And again, that is year 2 and 3. We wanted programs to have capacity in year 1 to work towards that. A bridge program is a program that is designed to help students connect to that next level. That is an adult basic education student who is taking some contextualized instruction, and they are moving towards credential attainment or higher education. Okay. So as you look at the NOFO, there are many, many links about what these resources, and there's key terms and everything you need to look at that. I would encourage you to look at the links for the IET in the NOFO. It will give you a wealth of understanding of what that looks like for year 2. So I'm going to pause and read a couple more questions. The next question, based on performance measures, will measurable skill gains in FY22 be based solely on NRS assessment education level gains for FY22, or will MSG calculation incorporate other tracked data? Okay, so I want to pause and talk about measurable skill gains. Measurable skill gains are a variety of outcomes. They include education functioning level. That means your student has been properly assessed at the beginning of their instruction, has been properly post-test at the end of 40 hours or 60 hours of instruction, and then we see an education functioning level gain. That is one form of a performance measure. That is one form of a measurable skill gain. Another form of a measurable skill gain is the high school equivalency attainment. So you get, that's part of it. Another form of a skill gain is credential attainment. So there are multiple ways to get a measurable skill gain. So all of those metrics are lumped into a measurable skill gain. Okay, so to see that question again, to make sure I've answered it, will measurable skill gains in fiscal year 22 be based solely on NRS assessment education level gains? No, it's not solely on education functioning levels. It's based on multiple factors. There are multiple types of MSGs. Okay. The employment data will not be shared by student. We will never put out, the question is, will we have access to the employment and earnings data? Yes. The next question, I think I lost it. Will the employment data be shared by student or an aggregate form? It will be an aggregate form per program. We will not put out publicly personal identifiable information. So you will see what your program data is for employment second quarter, employment fourth quarter. That aggregated data, it is not by student level. So I want to pause here for one more statement on that. One of the things that I often hear from funded programs in the past is that we're not able to capture all of the data through data matching. So we capture performance data through matching with other state partners, employment and security, many other agencies, and we look at who is working. In order for those matches to happen, we need all of that student data to be as complete as possible. So if programs are not getting the benefits of all of their program, it's because we can't get a data match. So when we talk about that data question in your narrative, you're going to want to look at how are you going to ensure that all of the data that's necessary is full and complete. And when that happens, we have better data matches, and then you get more matches in your data. Okay, another question. If a student gets an HSE credential but not a measurable skill gain, we're still on the hook for the level gain. How will the credential attainment cancel out the need? Okay, again, we're looking at measurable skill gains and education functioning level. Education functioning level is a part of a measurable skill gain. But you will get a measurable skill gain if a student has a high school credential. You will get that skill gain, regardless of level that they're at. Okay, I'm going to come back. The next question. For programs serving a high number of undocumented students without an SSN, how will their employment impact be accounted for in Illinois? This is a very complicated question because typically we match that by social security numbers. So we may not be getting the full benefit for that. Make sure you have the student's full name, the student's full address. The name is spelled correctly. The name that they're going by in an employment market. Those things are essential. But many times for students who lack a social security number, you're going to get an education functioning level with a pre and a post test. That's where you're going to get their measurable skill gain, is that pre and that post test. So where does the employment data come from? The data match with IDES. What if we can prove employment by other means? For example, where did I go? The question is, with Missouri, this might be, okay. So you're asking for our data matches in bordering states. We are working on those data matches with bordering states. So if you can document that for your RFP process, that's fine. We are also working on those data matches with all of our bordering states. The question, it is my understanding MSGs are during program year, credential attainment are after exit. You may get a credential attainment during while a student is completing and they have finished their adult education program, earned their high school credential, at the same time earning an industry recognized credential. Those are all going to happen in that same year. Yes, we're going to give you that credit. We also recognize that students may obtain those credits after they've exited. So again, if you have a student who's getting a high school equivalency certificate within a year after exit, we give you credit for that. So it is a very complicated practice. For your benefit on the performance measures, we have updated on the website with all of the adult ed grant documents. There is a document from the National Reporting System. That document shows all of the tables that we report out to Octave for our end of the year reporting, and it also tells you where that data is derived from to help you understand what we're reporting and where that's coming from. It'll give you a fuller picture of our performance measures and where that's derived from. Okay, we're going to move on from performance measures and go to the next slide, please. Let's focus on eligible services and activities. Okay, we talk about this a lot, so I wanted to give you, like we call it 231 money or 225 money. So to give you a framework, the 231 funding is used for the ABE, adult basic education, adult secondary education, English language acquisition, and English as a second language services. Under this particular funding category, you can provide workplace literacy services, family literacy activities, English language acquisition activities, IELCE activities, but there is a set aside for that as well, workplace preparation activities, and integrated education and training. So these are the eligible services under this particular budget. Next. There is also funding for correctional education that is blended with that 223 money. It is section 225, corrections. There is a question in the budget narrative about eligible services, and there is a narrative question about correctional education. This funding is for incarcerated individuals, institutionalized individuals who are going to be using and having access to adult basic education instruction. This is my last question about performance measures. Is there or will there be a measurable skill gain given to students who demonstrated an increase in digital literacy skills? There was some conversation about what that could look like, but there are no defined assessments that say where we start and where they end. So at this time, while there is conversation happening about that, at this time there is no measurable skill gain for digital literacy acquisition without a formal pre and a formal post assessment. So I recognize where some of that information is coming from, but it's not quite there yet. Okay. Next slide, please. Eligible services for section 243. This is your integrated English literacy and civics education. You may write for this in combination with your adult education and literacy funding, or you may write for this independent of all of that. That is up to you. This is for integrated English literacy and civics with an IET program. These activities are designed to get adults who are ELL learners into unsubsidized employment. Okay, next slide, please. I'm not going to read this slide to you. I do want you to be aware of, as you prepare your budget, there are some restrictions on funding, federal funds, 5% administrative cost, basically state funds, 20% administrative costs. State performance is a little bit more flexible. So again, I would encourage you to review the sections 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 in the NOFO. Next. Okay, I had inadvertently thought I'd moved this slide up. But when we talk about funding and we talk about what you're writing for and we talk about all of the local plans, we encourage you to use your area planning council's information and the index of need. There is a link here in the handout, but that link is also in the NOFO. And this is basically how our funding is prorated per APC. So you look at, if you're new to this, you will see that map. You will see what APC you're in. You will be able to see how much funding is allocated for that APC. And then you can write for a portion of that funding or all of it. And we will move on with the next funding allocation. Okay, next slide. Okay, before I pause, before I go on to the application and submission, do we have any other questions? Okay, since I'm not seeing any, we're going to talk about the application submission. Okay, this is important. The application deadline is May 7th, 2021, 11:59 p.m. Anything submitted after that is not something that we can accept in a competition. You must submit it on time. You will submit it to the email address in this slide. Again, that email address is in the NOFO, and it's also in this handout. When you submit that, you will get a confirmation email that says we have received it. Make sure you get that confirmation email. If you don't have a confirmation email, then we did not see the submission come in. And we're very good at paying attention to this. We know they're coming, but please make sure you have a confirmation email that we have received your information. If you decide for whatever reason that you're going to submit multiple emails, for example, in one email you submit the narrative, in another email you submit the budget, in another email you submit supporting documents, whatever that looks like for you. You must submit to us. This is email 1 of 3, and then email 2 of 3, and then email 3 of 3. And make sure you get a receipt for each email that you send to us, because otherwise that is your record that we have your information. If you do not get that, again, we do not have it, and we need to double check. Okay? Very, very important. Frame this and put this on your desk until May 7th. The question that I have is, in what form do you want the grant submitted? Do we keep the budget in Excel, or can it be scanned and sent as a whole doc? That is entirely up to you. However you choose to put that together is fine with us. I'm simply indicating if you have separate attachments, you may want to clarify there are 3 attachments on this email, or I'm sending them each as an individual email so that we know in that text that what we have available to us. Again, we are very good at making sure this information is organized and we have it accessed, but for your records, you may want to submit that. Oh, well, okay. The question that I have is, you said 3 emails, can we send 1 email? Yes, you may send everything in 1 email. If you send everything in 1 email, you may want to say, I have 3 attachments in this email, and we will confirm that. Sometimes people have large files, and sometimes they send us things in multiple emails. So I want to clarify, if you choose to send things in multiple emails, it is very helpful to us to know how many emails we should get and how many we're looking for, and what we need to make sure that we're tracking so that we can file them and provide them to our grant readers accordingly. Okay, next slide. Pre-application process. You must be pre-qualified under GATA. There's a link there. Make sure that you are responding to the request for proposal by the due date. Make sure all the portions of the requirements are full and meet all eligibility requirements. Next slide. I strongly encourage you to use the Appendix H, the application checklist, as you're compiling your email or emails to send to us to make sure everything that you need is submitted. We will need a cover page with the FY22 request that is to be signed. We have made that electronic, so you can submit that with a digital signature. If you are writing as a consortium, all of your consortium partners will need to fill out a signature page. The budget narrative, and I will address that again, we will double check the budget narrative to make sure the formatting is correct, and that will need to be included. The uniform grant budget, and then all of the other attachments. Okay. Next slide. Okay, this is the grant narrative. Section 1 is demonstrated effectiveness and past performance. Section 2 is your partnerships and WIOA alignment. Section 3 is statement of need, program design, recruitment and retention, instruction and assessment, our bridge and integrated education and training programs, our data and monitoring, support services, professional development, and if you are writing for corrections education, there will be a section for that. If you are applying for the IELCE funding, you must address all of the program considerations, and there are specific questions in these sections that are identified for IELCE, and you must address those. We are not requiring digital signatures on the grant budget, and I will explain why. That's the question came in. Are digital signatures acceptable on the grant budget? And no, we do not need signatures on the budget, and I will discuss that in just a second. Yes, there is a disconnect. The question is, one place says the narrative is to be 25 pages or less, but another place it says 20 pages or less. It is 25 pages. We originally set this at a 20-page maximum, but when we looked at the size of some charts that you may choose to insert, we thought that would take up a lot of that document real estate, so to speak, and we wanted to give you time and space to clarify and detail out your answers. So we went to 25 pages, and I did not put that in both locations. So you have up to 25 pages to answer the narrative. Okay. Next page. There is a work plan that is going to be how you're going to operationalize all of the information you've shared in the narrative. It must be submitted. One work plan must be submitted for the 231 and 225 funding sources, your AEL and corrections. If you're writing for IELCE, you must need a separate work plan. It's important to know that these work plans will be given to your regional support. For those of you who are new to this, regional support are the ICCB entities that provide you support throughout your time working with the AEL grant. And that work plan is a living, breathing document. It's how you're going to operationalize what you're doing. But right now we're looking for how is this going to happen? When you tell me that you're going to develop a bridge program, the work plan details out the steps. Who are you working with? What does it look like? How are you going to measure it? Those kind of details. And they will be your continuation plans for years 2 and 3. Next page, next slide. Okay, before I talk about the review process, the question that we had about digital signatures on the grant budget certification page. One of the things I don't have in the slide presentation is our budget. There is a post-allocation budget process. Once we're writing this grant based on our anticipated allocations. Once we have final allocations and know what we have to distribute into each APC, and based on a funding formula, which is linked to in the NOFO and provided in the ICCB Adult Education Provider Manual, which is also linked in the NOFO, we will apply that funding formula to your grant request. There will be a post-allocation budget process. That budget will need to be signed. But right now, this budget does not, because we know that we're trying to ease this process up. I recognize many of you are probably still working remotely, so we wanted to give you as much access and space and not have to chase down signatures on multiple documents. Okay. So let's talk about our review process. Next slide. So our partnerships and WIO alignment is a minimal. The WIO alignment is really accepted, not accepted. The partnerships are where we're going to get some points. The statement of need, again, how does the proposal that you're putting together connect with the need in your area? Your program design, what are you going to do? Who are you serving? How are you going to do that? But if you look at our scoring points, our key areas here are recruitment and retention plans. What do those look like? What does your instruction and assessment practices look like? And what do your contextualized career instruction, bridge, and IET programs look like? Those are our key areas, and they're weighted the most. What do your data and monitoring practices look like? And finally, you're looking at support services and service integration and professional development. There is a section on correctional education if applicable. Next page. So you will get 100 points if you're not writing for corrections. If you're writing corrections, up to 125 points. The clarification question is the CEO signature on the signature page can be electronic? Yes, we have set that document up for electronic signatures. The rubric for the 243 IELCE funds, again, very similar, and that is worth 100 points. Before I move forward, I'm going to see if we have any questions on the grant narrative or the rubrics for scoring. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional or questions, so we can go to the next slide. Basically, that is our presentation. I want to reiterate a note that is in our chat, that when you submit the application, make sure it is complete, because we cannot accept missing attachments after the submission deadline. That is why that receipt email is so critically important. Make sure you have it detailed in that email or emails if you are submitting more than one, what you have on there, so we have a record and documentation so we can provide back to you, yes, we received this information. There was a question, and I'm seeing some comments in our chat. The question that we received is how that information is to be provided to us. What I will tell you is the question that was asked earlier is a format that you would like to submit it. If it was Excel or Word or PDF, those documents are up to you. You may choose to turn a document into a PDF. You may choose to keep it as an Excel or a Word document. That is your choice. but we must be able to open it. So please make sure it is in something commonly used. We cannot grab documents from a folder, like you cannot link us to a folder that we will go and grab documents. They must be submitted in that email. It is better to do something as a PDF, Excel, or Word, because we can open all of those. Okay? So now I'm going to be answering some of the questions that are coming in. So let me get back to some of these questions. The question is, if you are applying for 231 and 243, are you submitting separate narratives? No. You are submitting the same narrative. There are spaces specifically for the IELCE 243 funding questions in that same document. You do not have to apply for 231 funding to receive 243 funding. You may only apply for IELC if you choose to. If you're writing for both the adult education and literacy money and the IELCE grant, it's one narrative. It's two work plans, but one narrative. The question that came in is, our program has been serving ABE and ASE students for the last 7 years. Our plan is to start serving ESL students. Do we need to have a performance history in order to apply for IELCE funding? You do have a performance history. You have a performance history with the students that you have been serving, your ABE and ESL students. So you're demonstrating through that performance history that you have the ability to serve students and targeted students. So that is your history. So if you are somebody who's never been funded in the past from ICCB for this grant, you will have a performance history with the students that you have served, and you can share that with us. And that is what we're looking for in that demonstrated effectiveness, that history that you have of serving these target populations. There is a question. Several of the narrative questions ask for us to address how the activity will support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is there a policy we should be referencing when answering this question? There is no current and existing policy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, in the NOFO, in section H, where we provide additional resources, there is a resource on DEI that will help you frame what it could look like. What we want here is to ensure that we are serving equitably and inclusively to our populations. And that link in your resources will give you a framework that will help you understand what we could be looking for. Okay. I've answered all of the questions we have so far, but I am going to give a few more minutes for more questions to come in. Is there anything you need clarity on that I have talked about that was unclear or that I can clarify for you? Okay, I am not seeing any more questions. I am going to hang on for a bit. Is it possible to get a copy of our rubric from last year? The question, if I understand the question, are you asking us if we could give you the scoring from last year? Yes, you could have last year's scoring rubric from what you submitted on a continuation plan. However, this grant is very different from last year. But yes, if you send us an email, I will see how we can get you the feedback from last year's continuation plan. Again, for those of you who feel as though your questions were answered, feel free to sign off and enjoy the rest of your day. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day, but I am going to hang on for a few minutes for any additional questions that come in. And I'm going to ask my staff to hang on for just a minute, please, after this is done. Bill, you're asking for a copy from the competition from a few years ago. Bill, I'm going to ask you to email me the specifics of what you're asking for, and then we will try to get you what I have available. Do you have my email address, or would you like me to put that in the chat? Okay, I am going to put my email address in the chat. Now, I will be very clear on this. What we can't, whoops, I didn't send that to everybody. Let me try that again. Or,
Kathy, I can fix that for you.
thank you. What I will be able to tell you is if you're asking for prior documentation from prior grants scored, I can do that. What I cannot do is provide you guidance on an individual basis on how to address any of these concerns. That would be seen as an unfair support for program. So again, I can provide you with what we have in the past, but that is about as much as I can. Okay. Again, let's see. The question that just came in, could I clarify the response on the question about reviewing prior year's scoring rubric? Does ICCB feel last year's scoring rubric is a resource for providers with this year's NOFO? I do not feel that that is a resource for you. This year's competition is completely different. The questions are different, the structure, the scoring, the categories, all of that is very different. For people who are asking for prior year's resources, I can provide that, but it will not, would not be a resource for this particular RFP. I do understand why people are asking for it, and again, we are always transparent in our prior year's resources. To the best of our ability, I will get that to people who request it. Okay. Again, it looks like that wraps everything up for everybody. I don't see any more questions coming in, so feel free to sign off and enjoy your day.
Thank you all so much.